Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to Now, you may be familiar with Unreal Engine already, but in case you're not, Unreal is a game engine which has been used to create independent and big budget video games for decades. In more recent years, Unreal has grown in quality to the point that it is now being used in filmmaking as well to create high quality virtual sets on the fly. So today we're going to jump right in and take an introductory look at some of the tools we can use to quickly build an environment in Unreal. So first things first, we're going to create a project. When you first open Unreal, it will open to the Unreal project browser. And from here, we can select from different categories of prefab projects to open. So if we're making a game, we could make something that has some game assets already built into it. But for our purposes, we're going to go to the film/video and live events tab. And we're just going to create a blank project. I'm going to give it a name. Double check your project destination so that you know where it is so you can open it again later. And then I'm going to make sure that starter content is checked on, and I'm going to make sure that ray tracing is checked off. While the ray tracing in Unreal Engine is really impressive, it's still relatively new technology, and a lot of computers are not necessarily built to handle ray tracing, especially when running it in editor. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hit create to make my new project. This step will probably take a while, so sit tight while it creates your new project. And here we are in my new project. There's not much to look at, but that's okay. We will quickly start adding things to the scene. I should note that I am using Unreal version 5.1. Keep this in mind as Unreal releases new versions quite frequently, and the engine can sometimes change a lot between versions. So like other 3D software, one of our primary windows is the Viewport. Unreal handles navigation through the Viewport a little bit differently than some other 3D software though. So to rotate my camera, I'm going to hold right mouse button and drag around. And if I want to truck or pedestal my camera, I can hold the middle mouse button and drag my mouse around. And if I want to dolly in and out, I can use my scroll wheel. And then with the right click held, I can press the W, A, S, and D keys to naturally move around my scene. Furthermore, I can press Q or E to pedestal as well. This type of movement may feel more natural to people that play a lot of PC games, especially first-person shooters, but otherwise it may feel a bit unorthodox at first. All right, next let's add our first object to the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to here, and from here I can add all sorts of different objects and lights and visual effects. I'm just going to go to shape and cube, and now I have a cube in my scene. If I want to focus in my cube, I can press the F key. And now that I have my cube, I want to make some transformations to it. So just like Maya, we use the W, E, and R keys to translate, rotate, and scale objects in Unreal. So W to translate, E to rotate, and R to scale. You can of course grab the middle of a gizmo to transform in all directions, except for rotate. Or you can transform on two planes if you grab between two of the handles of a gizmo. If you want to translate or rotate locally rather than in global space, you can do so by pressing this button right here to toggle between local space, like so, and world space. Over here on the right, we have our outliner, which lists all the objects in our scene. And then below that, we have our details panel. And from our details panel, we can manually adjust the transformations of any object that we have selected. So I can change the location, or the rotation. And when I want, I could use simple math to adjust these transformations as well. So I could write times 2 for a location to multiply it. And for the details panel, there's a lot of other things we can change as well. For example, I could change what model this actually is. So this cube is a static mesh actor, and I know that because if I pull out the outliner, I can see what type of object this is right here. I can move type over a little bit as well, like that. And so that basically means that this is just a mesh, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be this cube forever, because I can select a different type of mesh for this static mesh actor to render. So I go down to skeletal mesh and pull up this drop down, and I'm going to grab this cone instead. And now my cube has become a cone, even though it's still named cube. So I could then right click it, so I could click it and press F2 to give it a new name. Let's call it cone now. Or I could go and type sphere, pull up a couple different spheres, and now I have a sphere. Again, F2, change the name to sphere. So while Unreal has added modeling tools with Unreal 5, it's not necessarily considered to be modeling software. So generally, artists would make these static meshes outside of Unreal in a software like Maya or Blender, and then import them into Unreal. And below static mesh, we have materials, where we can change our surface texture of this sphere. So with that drop down selected, I could go down here and give it a brick texture instead, or a brick material. Or I could scroll down, give it a concrete grime material. As we go further down the details panel, the options get a little more use case specific. So like, for example, I could simulate physics. Before we take a look at what that looks like though, let's see what it looks like without physics. I'm gonna hit these three dots here. I'm gonna go to simulate, and nothing happens. I'll stop the simulation. Then I'll turn on simulate physics, and then go to simulate again, and now the ball drops to the ground. And stop, and it snaps back into place. I can keep going on, but this is really all we need to know for now is transform, static mesh, and materials. We'll get into more of the details panel stuff later when we get into lighting, but this is good for now. So that's all good and well, but we don't want to just make a scene out of spheres. We want to bring in some objects. To do that, the first place we're going to look is in the Unreal Marketplace. Now, the Unreal Marketplace can be accessed through the Epic Games Launcher, which is required to install Unreal in the first place. In the Epic Games Launcher, you can go from the Unreal tab here on the left over here to Marketplace. And the Marketplace is a great place to find any sort of materials, objects, game mechanics, scripts, anything you possibly need for Unreal Engine. Most of the content on here costs money, but it's not usually too much. But we're going to just work with free assets today. So I'm going to go to Browse. I'm going to go down to Environments. And I just want to start with a full environment. And actually, I know exactly which environment I'm going to use because I've already downloaded it. But I'm going to show you how I would have found it normally. So now I'm in the Environments category. I'm going to click Free. And I can just sort of scroll through, go to the next page here. And I'm going to use the Rural Australia asset pack. Now, because I already have it, I can't add it to my cart again. So I'm going to add this City Park Environment Collection instead to my cart. And just click Cart and check out. You'll need an Epic Games account to get things from the marketplace, but it's a pretty quick sign up. You'll also need an Epic Games account again later when we use Quixel Bridge to bring in props that way. So now that I have, quote, purchased my free environment, I'm going to go to Library. And this is another area where you can launch Unreal Engine or launch your projects directly. And then below your projects is your vault, which contains all of the assets which you've acquired from the marketplace. Now I have a lot, so I'm just going to go ahead and do a search for and there's rural Australia. So I'm going to click add to project. I'm going to find the project I just made and hit add to project. And it will go through and add those files to your project. Minimizing this, I can go back to here. And I'm going to go down to my content drawer. And I like to dock this in my layout so I can always see it. And then over here in the very far left, you can see all the folders of your project. So I'm going to do rural Australia. And I can navigate on this side, or I can navigate over here to maps. And then let's just open an example. Let's open rural Australia example 02. And when you open this, it will probably take a little bit of time to prepare all of the shaders that are associated with this. Once it's done, you can look around and see the sample environments provided with this asset pack. Most full environment asset packages will have a couple of example maps to show off what can be made with their assets. And you just fly around and see what they did with it, what is possible with the assets provided with the asset pack. You'll click around, you'll notice that all of these rock faces are actually separate rocks. It's not just one big environment. So if I were to pull this out, that's what it looks like from behind. And so you can see the artists just took these different pieces of rocks and overlaid them together. And let me undo all that. And unless you were looking really closely, you would never know that these were a bunch of different pieces stacked on top of each other. So that's something to keep in mind when you are building out environments in Unreal, is that you can get creative with overlapping different pieces of, especially rock faces and different nature pieces, to combine them into new things. So now we've taken a good look at this example, I'm going to go down to this map, Rural Australia Content. And a lot of these asset packs also come with a map that just contains like one instance of every asset laid out in a grid. So here I can see every texture. I can see every visual effect. You can see these leaves falling. That's something I could use. We've got props, scatter, which is just like debris and foliage. We've got grass trees. We've got full trees, logs, rocks, ridges, walls, cliffs. So this is how I can quickly see exactly what comes with this asset pack. So now I've seen what I have to work with. I'm going to go ahead and create a new map. But one more thing before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and copy one of these objects I want to bring into the new map, just to show you how you can copy things from one map to another. So I'm going to go ahead and select this tree right here, and I'm going to hit Control-C to copy. And then I'm going to go up to File, New Level, and it'll give me this pop-up. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit Basic and hit Create. And that creates me a basic empty level with little more than just a sky and a ground plane. And then before I do anything else, I'm going to hit Control-V to paste that tree into this new level. And I'll just drag it over to the center here. That's, of course, not the only way to get objects from the Australia pack. That would take forever. Instead, I can go down here to Static Meshes under Rural Australia. And let's go to Rocks. Pull up a rock asset here and just drag it in. Now, while I have this here, I see there is a material instance here in my content browser. And theoretically, I could just apply that to any object I want by dragging it out into the scene and dragging it over a prop. So now this is a rock tree. I'm going to undo that because that's not what I want. So now I'm in this new map. I want to create a landscape. And to do that, I'm going to go up here. I'm going to click this drop down. And from selection, I'm going to go to landscape. And this will give me this menu here on the left, which allows me to make a large plane of geometry, which can be manipulated so that some parts are higher or lower. This is going to act as the base ground of our set here. So before I create it, I'm going to go over here to material. And I'm just going to scroll down, or I'm going to do a search for ground, because I know that this Australia pack came with a material just called M Ground 1. And then I'm just going to go here to create. And it fills the world with this flat plane. And while still in landscape mode, I have a couple tools that I can use to alter this terrain. So the first tool is the sculpt tool, which when I left click, raises the ground where I click. Give myself a little more space. And if I hold shift, I can lower the ground as well. If I make something really, really extreme, I then can go to smooth to average it all out. Or I can go to flatten, which will flatten everything to the elevation of wherever I first click. Over here we have erosion, which works kind of like smooth, but it leaves a bit of a rougher surface. And it focuses on taking out those sharp corners and peaks. And notice how it feels like a very natural sort of hillside here now, when you kind of look at it. And if I really just want to go back to 0, I can hit erase. And it will level everything to sort of the base flat plane that I started with. With all these tools, of course, I can adjust the tool strength. So if I wanted to really paint something up really high, really fast, go really strong, or I could paint very softly. I can also adjust the brush size to make something very large, or it could work very smallly. I can also adjust the brush fall off. So it's a very soft brush now, or make it very hard. So I'm just going to take a minute and sculpt out something I like. Bring back the eraser. Get a clean slate with the erase brush. Go back to sculpt. Drop down that tool strength. If I want to reset a property to the default, I can press one of these arrows. And if you're working in a large environment and you want to move your camera a little bit faster, you can go up to this button and adjust your camera speed. So you can move a little bit faster. All right, and I think that's where I'll stop for now with the landscaping. I can always return back to this mode later to make adjustments, but this is okay for now. A lot of this will be covered up with rock props anyway, so it doesn't need to be all that special. So now I'm going to go ahead and save my scene. So to do that, I'm just going to press this button right here, hit save, and because it's the first time, it needs a name. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder under content. I'm going to call this maps. Double click it, and I'll call this canyon. It's a small canyon, but one nonetheless. On the topic of saving and folders, this is what your project folder will look like. It by default will save under your documents folder, Unreal projects, and then here's my project, cool project. And the two most important things to find here are your content folder and your .u project. The .u project is basically the file that refers to all the contents within your folders here, as well as any settings and preferences you have set up for the project. It is the glue that holds everything together. And if you double click it, you can launch your project without having to go through all the other Unreal menus. It'll just launch straight to your project. And then in your content folder, you can find all the same folders that you're working with in the editor. So here's my rural Australia, here's my maps folder, and here's the canyon map I just made. And this is a .u map file, by the way. So Unreal has a couple different unique file types, and they all start with .u. So U map, U project. If I go into static meshes, I'll find U asset. So U asset is like a model or a soundbite or a texture that has been saved in Unreal specific format. And so if you were to import an FBX, it would then get automatically converted into a .u asset along with the FBX. So now I have my environment, I'm going to start decorating it with some rocks. I'm going to give myself a little more space here. And if I just want to search for all of these rocks without having to go to each folder, I could just go to the rocks folder and type static mesh. Now I'm only getting the actual models rather than those individual folders. And from there, I could just start dragging things in. So I grab a couple rock faces, stick them together. And I've got something new. And then I could hold shift and then click all three of these to select them all together. And if I hold alt and drag, I'll make a duplicate of my whole selection. And if I wanted to, I could scale this. If I scale it down enough, it'll flip on itself and make a reverse version of what I just copied. And then I can just move these individual parts around. Maybe change the scale on that a little bit. And I could just keep going with this process. To build out a nice level. If I want to be more precise with my transformations, I can turn off the snapping here. So this disables snapping for translations, and this disables snapping for rotations, and this disables snapping for scale. I could also adjust the increments at which things snap. So for example, I could make this snap only at 45-degree angles or at 0.5 angles. You'll want to keep an eye out for holes in your environment like this one. If you are not planning to have like an aerial view, that's fine. You can leave all these holes like that and no one will see them. But something like that will be pretty obvious. I'm just dragging a cliff. If you want to marquee select a whole bunch of props at once, you can hold Control and Alt and click and drag. And it gets you a whole big selection. And I'm just going to hold Alt and drag. And it's giving me a warning trying to copy these to the other side. So I'm taking a bit of a big risky move here to copy them over, but I'm going to give it a try. And it stuttered for a second, but oops. See, I've accidentally copied my landscape too, so I don't want that. I'm gonna rotate this and put this into place like I want it. At least roughly. I'm gonna make a lot of changes to this, but then I'm gonna just click the landscape and delete it, because I really don't want that. Now, I'd like to get some of these rocks out of the landscape that I've hidden here. So I'm gonna go over here to the landscape that remains in my outliner, and I'm gonna press the eyeball to hide it. I'm just going to hit Control and Alt again to marquee select some of those. And I can control click specific rocks to remove them some of the selection. And bring my landscape back. I could also just fly underneath my landscape and see what's under here. This may be a bit of a sloppy way to work, but it did get me a bunch of cliff faces onto the other side really quickly. Great, I'm happy with that progress so far. You can see already this is forming to make a really, well, parts of it are very polished already. And that really did not take me very long at all. And that was with just one asset pack. Let's take a look at another place to find assets that is available to us in Unreal Engine. And that is through the Quixel bridge. Now, Quixel is a service that makes very, very high quality photorealistic assets for use in 3D projects. And they have a deal with Unreal where all of their assets are available for free for Unreal Engine users. So to access the Quixel bridge, go to Window, and go down here to Quixel Bridge. It'll open this tab up here, right next to your map tab. And this tab is called the Quixel Bridge. And here you can browse through all sorts of free assets, which are available for you to use. And most of it is very natural stuff, so you'll find a lot of rocks and plants. But there's a lot of man-made props as well. So I'm gonna go to 3D Assets. You can see I can look at nature. I can specify bones or mushrooms or rocks. I can even specify what kind of rock I want. Look at volcanic rocks, for example. Or I could look for food or buildings. But I know what I want. I'm going to go to Historical, Wild West, Gravestones. I'm just going to grab this gravestone right here. You will need to log into your Unreal account again to make use of these, but once you do, you can just go to Download. And it'll take a second to download, and just hit Add. And you'll find over here in your content browser, there should be a new folder called Megascans. If you just go in there, you'll find whatever props or materials you grab from the Quixel bridge. And I'm just going to drag that in here. And just slide that under here. A little tilt. And let's see if I can add some rocks there. Once again, I'm going to search for static mesh. So now with a little grave setup, I want to adjust my lighting, make it a little bit more dramatic. Well, when I created this scene, it already imported with some lighting built into it. Namely, that would be the skylight and the directional light. Now, most of this light is coming in from the directional light. When I turn off the visibility, it pretty much goes completely dark. If I turn off the skylight, my lighting gets a little bit darker as well. So we're mainly going to be working with this directional light here. And when I rotate my directional light, it changes the position of my sun. Not only that, as the sun lowers, it changes the color of the lighting as well, especially in the sky. It tries to replicate a realistic sunset. Now, when I get to a certain height, there's a bit of an issue here. It seems like the shadows sort of stop working after a certain point. That is because the light is actually shining through the underside of this environment. So because these rocks in this landscape is all one-sided, the light is able to pass through easily. So this is a simple fix on my end though. All I have to do is go back to landscape. And I'm going to flatten this area. I'm going to hit erase. I'm just going to make sure that this canyon forms a wall that blocks off all of that light. Make sure it's the same on this side too. And now, go back to selection, zero in on that tree. Now all the light is blocked. So that's pretty cool, but maybe it's a little too dark on this tombstone. Well, I could go ahead and add another light by going up to here, going to lights, and adding a spotlight. And I can just put it over here, angle it above my grave. And I don't think I want it to be too strong, so I can adjust the intensity. Could make it really bright if I want. That's a bit much. Bring it back down. I could adjust my color. Maybe something like that. I think I'll aim for a fairly natural light. I want this to sort of blend in. And then I can adjust the distance of this spotlight by adjusting the attenuation radius. You can also adjust the inner and outer cone angles to make a wider or more narrow spotlight. There we go. And that's how we add a new light source. We can, of course, add other kinds of lights, like point lights, which just emit light in all directions, and rectangle lights. These lights will light up a whole area from the surface of a rectangle. So I can go over here and increase the width and the height. And now it's covering this whole rectangular area. Okay, this is looking really good, but this area of dirt is looking pretty plain. So I'm going to go ahead and add some foliage. To do that, I'm going to go to selection mode and foliage. Theoretically, I could go around and place grass blades one by one, but that would take forever. So I'm going to go to Rule Australia. I'm going to go under Scatter, Foliage Types. And what I'm looking for is static mesh foliage actors. And what foliage basically is repeated instances of a mesh that are simplified to save on processing power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all these bits of grass and drag them into this box here. I'll go ahead and grab these rocks as well. I'm just going to grab anything I want to sort of litter this scene. Take these twigs. I don't think I want to grab everything, but I'll leave it at that for now. Then here, I can check these boxes. And as I do, you can see that they are colored in more. I could also just select all these and click one checkbox to check them all. And now when I move my mouse into the world, it creates the sphere. And when I click with the sphere, it adds all these instances of those actors that I selected to my world. So I can paint in like this, and it adds twigs and grass and rocks all to my landscape to fill in that empty space. I can even paint on meshes as well, like so. And there we go. But let's say maybe I don't really like all of the twigs. Maybe I want to get rid of just one twig in particular. So I'm going to select all these and uncheck them, and then I will just select this twig. And I'm going to go to the erase tool and drag it over the foliage. And you can see as I click through, it gets rid of just that actor that I've selected. So that one particular type of twig is being removed. I could also adjust my erase density. Let's select all of these again. And with a increased erase density, it actually is only partially removing the foliage from where I'm drawing. So it lets you thin out what you're working with without getting rid of it entirely. And if I wanted to paint it back in, go to paint. We may reduce the paint density so it's not filling in so quickly. Or I could crank it up to max and fill it in a lot. And there we go. That's how you use foliage mode. And then if we want to actually run this and see what it looks like when it's, quote, in runtime or in real time, just go to these three dots and click selected viewport. And you will now be able to pilot around your scene as it is running. If this were a game, this is when you would actually start playing the game to test it out. But this is not the case, so instead we are simply flying around our scene. There is some weird artifacting going on. These white specks everywhere that would need some investigating. and some fine tuning. But overall, this is really, really good for the amount of time spent on it. And then once you're done playing, you just hit escape to leave that mode. And so with that, you have everything you need to start building out high quality environments in Unreal Engine. I could keep working on this forever, but I think that I will leave it at that for today. So with that, I wish you luck in your Unreal endeavors, and I hope you have a good day.